Hey everyone, we are here with Dietitian Cassie. She is a registered dietitian as well as a lead health coach and founder of Healthy Simple Life, a team of dietitians and personal trainers who provide real food and evidence-based nutrition and fitness coaching online, over the phone, and at corporate or community classes. They help people find freedom from diets and chronic health conditions through the power of real food so that they can live their life to the fullest. Dietitian Cassie and her team are passionate about debunking diet rumors, myths, and fads while teaching people how to eat real foods in balance to help them feel their best. She's also the co-host of the weekly podcast Low-Carb Conversations with Jimmy Moore, Dietitian Cassie and Friends, and the feature dietitian for the TV program Twin Cities Live. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Leanne. I'm so excited to be here.
I asked my community, we want to talk about blood sugar. Who do you want to chat about it? And everyone said you. Like, they want you to talk about blood sugar and low carbohydrate living and how that relates to high fat and what our insulin is doing. So we are ready to chat
Well,
about
this
all
is right
things.
up my alley, especially because, throughout all my schooling to be a dietitian, I was taught the conventional nutrition approaches. Low fat is healthy, and we need to count calories for weight loss and eat Cheerios and oatmeal and margarine for heart disease and make sure, people with type 2 diabetes get enough carbohydrates, which just boggles my mind. We'll probably talk about that a little bit. And all of this is just so different than what I teach now. And I didn't know any better when I was going through schooling. So unfortunately, what you're taught to be a dietitian is based on really old textbook based information, and it's not based on the current research. And this was really frustrating for me personally because I embraced what I was learning, trying to be the best dietitian student I could be. And I felt awful. I was a sugar addict, and that's why I'm so passionate about talking about blood sugars. And I was just always thinking where I'd get my next fix of sugar. I had compelling cravings. I found it difficult to focus. Yet I was eating this diet rich in whole grains and soy milk and low in fat and, no red meat and really low in calories. And it just didn't really make sense. So when I got my RD, LD credentials and really dug into the research, I kind of found out that what I was learning in school wasn't even matching up with what I was finding to be true in the actual research. So when I started to apply that to my own life, ditching the grains and ditching the artificial sweeteners and overcoming my fear of fat and really embracing it and taking high quality supplements, something I wasn't taught about in school, I just instantly, it was really like a just overnight transition. I just felt amazing. So there comes a point when you just kind of have to step back and look at what makes sense and what doesn't. And it never made sense to me to be eating all these processed, high carbohydrate, high sugar foods, which are pushed on us from every angle today. And it made so much more sense for me to eat real food. And that's exactly what my team of dietitian coaches and I do at Healthy Simple Life is we work with clients every single day, just help them keep it simple and get their health back through finding out what their root cause is, and then helping them to heal that through the foods that they're eating and the supplements and nutrients that they're putting into their body, instead of just, turning to a drug or trying to do these quick fix diets that just don't last. So I'm excited to be here, and we're just proud of the fact that we like to help people keep it simple. That's our motto, and it's a very different approach from a lot of other healthcare practitioners, but I just think that health doesn't have to be that complicated.
You're so right. I know I have a doctor, and he's like, and then take this supplement with this supplement and this time, and it's like, I need to write all this stuff down, and it gets really complicated. And for people that are just getting going with eating healthy and taking care of their bodies, if they're thrown like all this information, it gets really overwhelming to the point where it's just like, you know what? I'd rather just like not even pay attention to it and I'll be fine.
Well, even like you just said, supplements are great if they're high quality, and it can still be confusing because there's so many options out there and there's so many great ones, but sometimes you just have to take it a step back and just look at the big picture and take it back to the basics because it's not an all or nothing thing. This is a lifestyle. You're embracing a new lifestyle, and it's not like, you have to do it all or nothing at all. Or if you fall off the bandwagon, you just don't hop back on. We're not talking about a diet here. We're talking about just a new way of living. And I'd go as far as saying that 90% of our health concerns are related to nutrition and what you put into your body. And the exciting thing and empowering thing about that is you get to decide. And every day, we see the healing power of real food and watch our clients take these small steps that just provide huge changes in their life. So I'm all about living life to the fullest and helping other people do the same thing.
My community is mostly high fat, low carbohydrate, more ketogenic style of eating. And I get a lot of questions about what is blood glucose? Is that the same as blood sugar? So just starting there to give people like a base understanding, like what is blood glucose?
Yeah, blood sugar. So basically, any carbohydrate that you eat, this is the normal blood sugar response or blood glucose response. You can kind of use those words interchangeably. Any carbohydrate that you eat, regardless of the source, whether it's bread or pasta or rice, we think of those as carbohydrates. Your community probably knows that vegetables and fruits are also carbohydrates. All of that turns into sugar in the bloodstream, and that's what we call glucose.
Mm-hmm.
So then that glucose stimulates the production of insulin by your pancreas. Your pancreas secretes insulin. Insulin is also known as our fat storage hormone. So you can gain weight that's why when you have a high carbohydrate diet and your pancreas is running on a treadmill to produce insulin to take that sugar out of your bloodstream, it gets stored. And what's it stored as? It's stored as fat. And the reason why is because it's just toxic to have more than a couple teaspoons of sugar floating around your bloodstream at once. So whenever we eat those carbohydrates, we have to do something with them. So your insulin's kind of like a key that unlocks these doors to your cells, and it puts the sugar in there for later. But a lot of people are eating so much sugar that they don't actually have to tap into those stores. So what happens is it's like called gross weight gain. Yeah, exactly.
It's called weight gain. So I know that a lot of people have heard, insulin, when insulin is about your body, is it fair to say that maybe fat burning isn't a thing? When there's insulin pumping through your veins and they're unlocking those doors to your cells to push the sugar in, the last thing it's thinking is let's burn fat, right?
Yeah, so there's two hormones. There's insulin, and then there's the opposing hormone called glucagon. And they can't coexist. You've got one or the other working for you. And insulin is known as that fat storing hormone, and glucagon is known as that fat burning hormone. So glucagon is what you want to be your best friend, right? We all want glucagon so we can burn fat, even if we're not trying to lose weight. I mean, we want to burn fat because that's what's going to give us energy. That's called metabolism. So you want to keep your blood sugar levels stable so that glucagon can come out. And if you're constantly increasing your blood sugar levels or riding the blood sugar roller coaster, I like to call it, by eating a diet full of just too much carbohydrate, which is different for everyone. Some people can tolerate carbohydrates better than other people. But when you're eating these carbohydrates all day long and kind of riding that blood sugar roller coaster that most Americans are, you're just constantly causing your pancreas to secrete insulin, and you're never actually tapping into that glucagon, that fat burning hormone. And that's really where we want to be. And that's one of the reasons why blood sugar stabilization is so important, not just for, preventing weight gain and promoting weight loss, but even just for energy levels, because riding a roller coaster is fun, right? Like we all like, a lot of people like to ride a roller coaster. They're fun. Your stomach churns in anticipation of the unknown, and there's those ups and downs. But most roller coaster rides last 2 to 3 minutes. So imagine riding a roller coaster all day long. I mean, it's fun for a few minutes, but you'd be exhausted if you're riding it all day long. And that's what happens when we're riding this blood sugar roller coaster. Is it depletes us of our good energy and our good moods, and it's just really no way to live. We get mood swings, we get intense sugar cravings, we have a tough time focusing, that constant fatigue. That's what it's like when you're following the standard American diet, which is eating a high carbohydrate diet and just riding that blood sugar roller coaster. So when you add in healthy fat, this is where it comes in, for your community. Yeah, we love fat. Yeah. That's what helps to stabilize your blood sugar levels and give you kind of those nice rolling hills versus those extreme highs and lows.
Right. Okay. So when we're eating high fat with a relatively low carbohydrate eating style, we are using that glucagon, like we're becoming glucagon's best friend, and they're coming out more than insulin is, and so we're in fat burning mode a lot more. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say, because fat is really the best buffer for carbohydrates. So, my approach is I call it PFC balanced eating. So you're eating protein and fat along with carbs from hopefully real food, but we don't expect perfection either. So you're not just eating, the standard American diet, they say it's balanced. It's really just a high carbohydrate diet, very low in fat, maybe moderate in protein. So I'm just saying, let's just balance it all out. Let's add in more fat. Let's make sure we're getting enough protein, and let's try to pick, the best carbs that we can. So fat is the best buffer for carbohydrates. Fat actually slows the absorption and the assimilation of carbohydrates into our bloodstream, and that kind of makes them last longer instead of those spikes and drops. So it promotes blood sugar stabilization. So the problem with eating any carbohydrate without fat is when you just turn into straight sugar, it spikes your blood sugar levels. And then what happens? They drop shortly after. And what do we crave? What do we crave? People say it's about willpower. They say, I don't have any willpower. The vending machine calls my name. what's not true about that is it has nothing to do with willpower. When you crave sugar, it's a biochemical response because your brain is really smart. And when your blood sugars drop, it's like, oh, you just need sugar. So what's the simplest thing that's going to raise my blood sugar levels is sugar, right?
Yeah, exactly. You get in that nasty loop of
Yeah,
ridiculousness.
vicious cycle.
So with insulin, we hear of insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. So what are the differences between those two?
So, you want to be sensitive to insulin because insulin resistance is what happens when your cells are exposed to too much insulin too often because those blood sugar levels are constantly elevated, following that standard American diet. It's from eating too much carbohydrate or too much sugar. So then your cells become desensitized and stop responding to insulin. So you want to be insulin sensitive. That would be the positive term. Being insulin resistant is what happens that sugar just sits there in your cells and it can't be used and it can't be stored. So then here's what happens is extra insulin is secreted by your pancreas. So it's not like you don't have enough insulin being secreted. It's like your cells aren't responding.
Like, la, 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 la.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you walk into a really noisy restaurant and at first you're like, I can't hear anything. And then after like 5 minutes, you can hear.
Yeah.
It's kind of what's happening, with and your cells are just like, all right, I'm, kind of getting sick of this. So your cells become insulin resistant. They no longer respond to insulin. So your pancreas just thinks it needs to make more insulin, which just makes your cells more resistant. And that's a really vicious cycle to get into. So the good news is your cells can actually regain their sensitivity if you give them a break from not exposing them to so much insulin. So if you kind of go backwards, okay, well, what caused the need for the insulin in the first place, right? It was those carbohydrates or that sugar. So why don't we just eat less carbohydrates and sugar? And what do we eat instead? Fat, right? Healthy fat.
Totally. A little bit of greens in there for your healthy carbs and you're like good to go.
And fat is really healing too. So it's not just that it's a good thing to substitute the carbs or to eat fat instead of the carbs, but it's also really healing and it helps your body heal from inflammation that can happen as a result of eating too much carbohydrate over a long period of time. So that's a good thing too.
Is it fair to say that if I've been eating carbs for a really long time, chances are I'm insulin resistant, or is there certain signs and symptoms to look for with resistance? And how do you know when you've become insulin sensitive?
It's kind of hard to know, testing, they'll do testing at the doctor's office and they'll tell you if you have pre-diabetes, which is kind of a weird term because it's just a number that they look at. And then when you hit a certain number, all of a sudden you have type 2 diabetes. It's all just insulin resistant. So if you're diagnosed with pre-diabetes, you really don't want to mess with that. You want to start taking control with the food that you're eating. So some signs, symptoms, how might you know you're insulin resistant? Can be kind of hard to tell. Weight gain, being tired all the time, hormonal imbalance can tie into that, sleep disturbances, difficulty in focusing, things like that, which really aren't fun to live with for anyone. So I think the cool thing and the really good thing about eating to balance your blood sugars is that, no one wants to get resistant to insulin. So whether you're insulin resistant, whether you have diabetes, whether you have pre-diabetes, whatever it is, everyone can benefit from eating more healthy fat and eating more PFC balance versus following that high carbohydrate diet.
Totally. So it's kind of like if you're eating a ton of carbs, maybe perhaps look at this regardless of.
Regardless of. And, some people can tolerate more carbohydrate than others. Triglycerides are kind of a good way to measure that. We look for triglycerides that are close to like 50. We definitely want them under 100. If your triglycerides are elevated, it shows that your body's just not able to handle the amount of carbohydrate that you're putting into your body. So that's kind of how you can tell how your body is handling the carbohydrate that you're putting in.
Yeah, I use that in my own practice too. If it's over 100, I'm like, definitely the carbs just aren't working for you.
Yeah.
And I chatted with Jimmy about this a couple of months ago when we did an interview about low-carb, high-fat people, and they noticed that their blood glucose levels increase in the morning. So do you know anything about this? Have you seen this? When people start eating this way for, I would say, probably 4 to 6 months. High fat, low carbohydrate in the morning, their blood glucose levels are pretty high. And then as soon as they start eating, it gets lower and lower and lower throughout the day. It's quite interesting. And it doesn't happen to everybody, but I've definitely noticed a trend.
I think it can happen, when you're changing something up in your body, kind of when you give your pancreas a break and your cells a chance to heal and become more sensitive to insulin instead of continually bombarding it with sugar. You're no longer requiring that much insulin and you're giving your body some time to rest. I think that can just kind of happen or as a result of that. I think that's kind of why it's important to make sure you're being consistent with it, instead of just kind of going from one thing to the next, because then your body can kind of adapt. And the body does interesting things. I mean, even with our clients, when they come to us just for weight loss and we set them up with a certain way of eating, our PFC balanced eating regimen, and we try to focus on whatever their issues are, hormones, thyroid, we heal from the inside out. Sometimes people can actually gain a couple pounds before they lose 25. And it's just kind of, the body does some interesting things when we put it into healing mode. It can, especially because you're just changing something up and it's not used to it. So it is interesting, some of the things that can happen. I'm kind of guessing that's what's happening there.
Okay, cool. And I campaigned the Healthful Pursuit community with a bunch of random questions about blood sugar. So
love random questions.
Rapid fire reader questions on blood sugar. So you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Does a bad night's sleep affect blood sugar readings? So if you have a really bad sleep or you're waking and tossing and turning, would that affect your blood sugar?
Everything can affect blood sugar, surprisingly. I don't really know what the mechanism could be, but I do know that sleep disturbances can definitely influence blood sugar levels. I'm not sure if it's just because when you're resting, that's kind of your body's chance to rest and replete. But I know that can happen, definitely.
Okay, fair enough. And does high cortisol affect blood sugars? Like you said, everything could affect it, but if you're constantly stressed out, thinking of the adrenals and the function between blood sugar, could that affect a person's stress level, or rather, could their stress level affect their blood sugar?
Could their stress level affect their blood sugar? Yeah, absolutely. Definitely cortisol can. That's something that, we talk about with our clients a lot because a lot of people don't realize just how negatively, stress can impact your weight. So the way that this happens is cortisol is known as your stress hormone, and it's released in response to stress, anxiety, and lack of sleep. So this is probably another way that this lack of sleep could play in here, because I think lack of sleep could increase cortisol, which here's how this happens. So cortisol raises your blood sugar levels. I just made that connection when I was saying that out loud. Sometimes I have to
wait a minute.
think through things. I knew there was a reason for it, and I don't always know exactly why. So this is why, now that you mentioned cortisol. So cortisol raises your blood sugar levels. That's why, which causes your pancreas to release that insulin, that fat storing hormone, to bring that excess sugar to your cells to be stored as fat. This is why sometimes people gain weight and they blame it on the fact that, I'm too stressed, I'm too tired to exercise. So maybe they have another cookie or a third glass of wine or both. And it's just another scenario that kind of shows that your weight and your health, it's not just a matter of balancing calories in, calories out. Your hormones play a huge role in your metabolism and your weight and even your blood sugars. So cortisol is definitely a pretty big, hormonal player in this game of blood sugar stabilization, and it can definitely increase your blood sugar levels. So that's where the lack of sleep and the stress would tie in.
Totally. And I've noticed with some clients, if you go too low carb for too long, I've worked with a lady who's 15 grams of carbohydrates every day for 6 months, and then her cortisol levels start increasing quite significantly. Is that usually because your body needs a certain amount of carbohydrate in order to function? I've seen, as soon as we increase their carbohydrate, their cortisol
goes down. Yeah, I would think that it's because it can be hard. Change is hard on your body. And I do think that we need some carbohydrate. I know some people are in the 100%, ketosis camp, and I'm not quite there yet. I'm all kind of about finding that balance that's right for you.
Yes.
And I think just we've seen that with clients too, where they just totally cut out carbs, because we usually kind of explain to them exactly what I'm saying here is that carbohydrates, even if they're better ones, even if they're vegetables, they turn into sugar in their body. Sometimes people walk away and they just stop eating carbs. And that can be a big shock to your body, which is probably what could cause that increase in cortisol levels, because your body is so stressed, and that cortisol is your stress hormone.
Yeah, and I believe that cortisol will break down the muscle to convert it into glucose. Is that true?
Yeah, it can do. Yeah, it can do those things because your body needs things. Yeah, when your body's really smart, and if it needs glucose, it'll make it, and it can definitely break down your muscle, which is not what you want to happen either.
Totally. And I love that you said you got to find what's right for you. Just because one person does really good at 15 grams of carbohydrates doesn't mean that you'll do good at it. I'm probably around 80 to 100 in a day, and that's where I feel best right now. But that could change in 3 months, so you never know. So I love that you
I think
mentioned
that's
that.
where individualization comes into play. And like, I'm sure you, like me, Leanne, are just putting out information, on your YouTube channel and on your blog. And what I'm putting out there is general information. This is exactly why I recommend that people meet with a dietitian coach or some other health coach, someone that they trust, because it's not a one size fits all solution. I mean, a lot of our general recommendations will work for a ton of people. But when it comes down to it, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, you and I were even talking before we started recording about this new blog post that I put up called 10 non-dietary reasons why you're not losing weight. These are things we dive into in our coaching appointments, inflammation and thyroid, gut health, food sensitivities, hormones, sleep and stress and vitamin D. And there's so many factors that could be playing a role into why, you are the way you are or why you're not reaching your goals. And it can be really hard to figure that out on your own. And you're not really expected to figure that out on your own. Like that's what people like you and I are for, right? So
Yeah,
we want
totally.
to help you. And like that individualization is so important because what works for, Jack might not work for Jill. And it's based on genetics and our lifestyle and our activity level and our age and what we're eating and what we've eaten in the past. Like there's just so many things that play into it. So I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think individualization is key.
Yeah, totally. I always say to my clients, just as we all look different on the outside, we all work so different on the inside. So even though like we both kind of have brown hair, like we look completely different. And that's how our eating style needs to be put together. So I couldn't agree with you more. There's another question. A reader says, my doctor has just told me that I have insulin resistance, but I'm 6 months into eating high fat. What gives? And somebody mentioned, well, what about psychological insulin resistance? Could this be playing, like, I don't know anything about psychological insulin resistance. I've never heard of this before.
Well, we don't see this very often, but it can happen from time to time. Low carbohydrate diets over time have been shown to cause temporary insulin resistance, which, can start to raise blood sugars over time if you aren't careful. I think this is just theory. I think it's a downregulation of carbohydrate metabolism. So when you're not eating carbs, your body, it's kind of like if you do anything for too long of a time, your body starts to adapt. I think it kind of just goes back to what we were talking about earlier about your body just kind of trying to adapt and anytime there's a big change. So if you do the same exercise routine over and over again, you can start to lose some of the benefits. I think the same can kind of be true for a low carbohydrate diet. I think at some point your body can kind of just get used to it and start to adapt. And one thing that we do see is that temporary insulin resistance when your blood sugars start to rise, because what essentially happens is your liver just starts producing more sugar. So what we've kind of found, and we don't do this very often, but once in a while when someone is in a situation like this, like the person who asked the question, I think the answer is doing some cycling instead of just always saying, were you thinking that?
Yeah, I was like, would carb refeeding work? Like just cycling your carbs like every 3 days, just have some carbs and okay.
I think so. I think just instead of always staying low carb and doing that same exercise routine every day, that same 20 minutes of walking or whatever it is, just as another example, I would recommend some cycling maybe once a week or so. Just add in some extra carbohydrates, just more than you normally would. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, maybe adding in some extra fruit or some sweet potato a day a week, or, if you're already doing that, maybe adding in more. That can kind of kickstart that glucose metabolism again. And I think it can really pull people, we've seen this happen, pull them out of that insulin resistance and solve the problem.
Totally. And would that be okay for diabetics as well, or does that get a little bit muddled?
Yeah, it can get a little bit muddled, but I think that, insulin resistance really is, that's what type 2 diabetes is. So if someone is insulin resistant, it does seem kind of backwards to be adding in more carbohydrate to get them out of that. I think it can work.
Yeah, totally. Okay, we're totally on the same page. That's awesome. I'm going to skip by the last question.
This is why we're friends.
Yeah, exactly. The bonus question, is glucogenesis supply driven or demand driven? Your turn. What?
I think that question is stumping me. I don't think I get the bonus points.
That's why I put it as a bonus question, because is glucogenesis supply driven or demand driven? I would imagine that it would be demand driven, right? As you need it, your body will
your body will supply it as you need it. That's the way that, I think it was the way the question was worded that was confusing me. Yeah. I agree with you. I think that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Oh my gosh.
And then people get that confused with gluconeogenesis. That's a metabolic pathway that results in generating glucose from non-carbohydrate substances. But that's not what they're asking. They're asking about glucogenesis, right?
Well, they did mention something about steak turns into cake. So, and
Yeah, so
that would be
I was actually
taking.
thinking that's why I was a little bit confused because I think they meant to say gluconeogenesis, GNG.
Oh, okay.
That's the metabolic pathway where we learned all about this in dietitian school many years ago, is when I had to draw out the Krebs cycle. And it's where your body can actually make glucose from non-carbohydrate substances. And this is what I was thinking of earlier when you said if someone's eating no carbs at all and they need sugar, like they need some sugar. Your brain does need some sugar. You can actually make glucose from, pyruvate, lactate. These are all the different parts of the cycle. I remember drawing it out. We had to draw. I had this huge poster. It was really
Poster
awesome. All
board,
these
yeah.
colors hanging in my bedroom. Super nerdy. Didn't plan on telling your listeners that. Anyway, so I think that's what maybe they were referring to is the whole steak turns into cake thing. If you're not eating any carbohydrate at all, if your body needs some, it's going to do that. It's going to go that route. And you're putting yourself at risk for breaking down your muscles. So, I think there's nothing wrong with eating some good carbohydrates. And when I say good carbohydrates, I'm thinking real food. I'm thinking, especially the non-starchy carbohydrates like spinach and any of your vegetables that you don't necessarily have to cook, broccoli and cauliflower and cucumbers. And I think that's a really great place to start. As far as fruit and as far as sweet potatoes, the starchier carbohydrates, we do recommend kind of being careful with those, especially if someone already has insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, or even if they're just trying to lose weight, because those are the ones that are going to raise your blood sugar levels the most. So, it's hard to give a general recommendation for a lot of people. We would recommend starting out with, and this might be way too much for some people, but I was going to say we'd recommend maybe starting out with a half a cup of either starchy vegetable or fruit at every meal or snack, which might sound crazy, to people who are already eating really high fat. But for a lot of people who are eating the standard American diet, they're doing way more of that at every meal. So
Oh gosh,
even that is a drastic reduction. For someone who's already eating high fat, if they might be doing a quarter cup at a couple of their meals or snacks a day and just be fine with that. So again, it just goes back to that individualization.
Cool. Yeah. So it sounds like if one has insulin resistance and they've been doing high fat, low carbohydrate for a while, check out your carbohydrates. And I created a video specifically about this, when the signs are there to maybe perhaps include some carbohydrates, because like you said with your clients, it's you explain what carbohydrates do in the body and then they hear, oh yeah, no, she said just remove all carbohydrates because that would be better for my health. And it's no, wait, I did not say that. So for people that are insulin resistant, figuring out what that carbohydrate requirement is for them.
And we've got this nice little, I don't know if you can see this.
Oh, yeah.
But it's got our P's, our F's, and our C's, and which ones are starchy carbohydrates, which ones are non-starchy. And we've got the blood sugar roller coaster on the back, and it explains insulin and glucagon and how that works. I've got this for free on my Getting Started guide on the website.
Oh,
so if you
awesome.
healthysimplelife.com, /newsletter. If you just click on that and sign up, I have a bunch of different guides. I have my top 10 tips for overcoming sugar cravings and just some different things that I put together as resources. So, but this is really nice to have. We help our clients kind of plan their meals using the different categories of P, F, and C. And it can be helpful, hang it on your refrigerator just so you know which carbs are starchy and which ones aren't, because that can get kind of confusing. And, it's not about perfection and being nitty gritty. I love how you said in my bio, I'm not all about counting calories or grams or points or morsels or anything. That said, it's still important to eat in balance. And that's really what we're going for here.
Totally. Yeah. And having a healthy relationship with it. I always find, when people are getting going, I say, please don't count your kale. If you're obsessing about how much kale is on your plate and stuff like that, that's a really good indication that you've gone a little bit too far. And just having that healthy relationship with, my intention is to eat low carbohydrate-ish, high fat-ish with balanced protein. And, if you have a list like that, picking from that list and really listening to your body. Because
that said, when someone's coming from the standard American diet, and they're adding in more fat, a lot of times they don't really know where to start. Are we talking about a stick of butter at every meal, or are we talking about, a teaspoon? So for that, for people kind of back to that general recommendation, starting with that half a cup of the fruit or the starchy carbohydrates, I'd recommend at least a couple tablespoons of fat. And again, for some people that might be really low. For me, that's really low. I have a lot more fat than that. But for people just starting out, adding in a couple tablespoons of coconut oil or half of an avocado or a couple tablespoons of nuts or seeds or olive oil, that can be a really great place to start. Because they'll experience benefits right away. And because it can be scary to start adding in fat when you've been restricting or eating a low-fat diet for years. So what's amazing is just by adding in a couple of tablespoons every time you eat, within a day or two, you'll notice, increased brain power, energy levels, consistent energy levels, because remember that fat is what's helping you stretch out those carbohydrates so that you're being more stable instead of just riding that blood sugar roller coaster. You just feel so much better. And that alone can be a big enough motivator for people to keep doing it. And then if weight loss is a goal, well, it's kind of interesting how you do start to lose weight when you add in more fat, which is a little bit backwards, because remember, fat has more calories. Fat has 9 calories per gram, and protein and carbs only have 4. So you would think, and this is why calorie counting doesn't really work, because the first macronutrient you restrict when you start counting calories is fat. But wait, fat helps with weight loss because it buffers the effect of carbohydrates and causes a decreased need for insulin, your fat storing hormone. So when you really look at the science, it makes sense to eat fat, right?
Yeah, and you eat a lot less. Like I know when I started eating fat, I could go 5-6 hours without having to snack and just feel that, like you said, like that major low where it wasn't even that I was hungry. It's just, I need to eat this. Like I will punch you in the mouth if I don't eat something, you know?
That's called hanger.
Yeah, exactly. Hanger.
That's one of the steps towards hanger management, is adding in more fat so that you don't hit that low, or even tying it back to, I run 4 marathons. I don't run marathons anymore, but my first couple I fueled with carbohydrates, because carbo loading is what every runner knows they're supposed to do, right? And then when I kind of got into this higher fat, more balanced eating approach, I found that my third and fourth marathon, I didn't even have to eat at all during my marathons. Like fat helped me push through what they call hitting a wall. And that's when you see everyone just get so tired and they fall down and they're fatigued and they're drinking Gatorade like it's going out of style. And when you have fat in your body, it helps stretch out your, carbohydrates, and you don't feel that way because you feel so balanced. You get that consistent energy level. It's just amazing. And I think, a common misconception when you're diagnosed with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes is that you're doomed to forever be a diabetic and that you need pills and insulin continues to increase and that's just how it's going to be and that's just your life now. And that flat out isn't true. So if you've never heard someone say that before, you're hearing me say that right now. Type 2 diabetes is reversible. We can manage it. We can improve it through real food. And it is possible to get off of medications once you get that under control by choosing the foods, foods to put in your body that help to support blood sugar stabilization. And sometimes it is also pretty much necessary to increase supplementation as well with high quality supplements, especially if your goal is to get off medications. So, we see this, my dietitian coaches and I see this continually. We have so many clients with type 2 diabetes who actually just come to us for weight loss, because that's also something that goes hand in hand with insulin resistance, like we talked about. And they don't even know that could be a goal of theirs, is to get off their medications. And it's just amazing when they embrace our PFC concepts for balanced blood sugar levels, how that can actually happen. And they were never told that before by their doctor.
That's sad. Hey, you go on these prescriptions and you just say, like, this is your life now.
It's what I was taught in school as a dietitian as well. It's the sad reality of it. And the exciting, empowering thing is that it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. And fats are the key, basically. Mm-hmm. Like, eat more fat.
If there's one population or group of people who need fat the most, I would say it is people with diabetes. And that's ironically the exact opposite of what we're being taught by the American Diabetes Association and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, because their approach is encouraging carbohydrate consumption, which spikes, which causes the need for insulin, which doesn't make any sense. It boggles my mind saying it.
Yeah.
And then covering up those blood sugar imbalances with medication, which is really a backwards approach. So now that we've talked today about the normal blood sugar response and how that happens, and you understand the science behind the importance of fat for blood sugars, you can quit feeling guilty pouring melted butter over your vegetables and putting heavy cream in your coffee, because fat plays such a critical role in blood sugar issues. Totally. And it lowers your insulin requirement. That's kind of the basis of this, is it slows that glycemic response because it acts as a buffer for carbohydrates, like we talked about, slows their absorption. It reduces your blood sugar spiking effects. And when you consume fat with the carb, you get the stable blood sugars, and that's really what we're going for here. Fat does not stimulate the need for insulin or an insulin release. Carbs do. So the fact that, these organizations are still recommending a low-fat diet, it doesn't make any sense at all. Fat is so important.
It doesn't. Even by you saying that very line, that doesn't make sense that we would be recommending that these people eat carbohydrates when we know that carbohydrates are what's fueling the insulin response, but fat doesn't. Like, it just It doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense. And so thankfully, like a lot of people that watch my show and stuff like that, they're totally on the high fat
Mm.
awesomeness. So that's really great that they've kind of overcome that hurdle, but
I
also
love
to know
that.
like that message of just like fat is not going to make you fat. In fact,
I know. I
carbohydrates
wish fat
do.
was called something else. I wish it
I
was called
know.
energy or vitality or brain power or something other than fat, because that's what's really confusing about it, isn't it? And even like, thinking about how fat keeps us full, like you and I
Yeah.
were talking about how it holds us over and prevents us from hitting that wall. It's natural and easy to consume fewer carbohydrates when you eat fat, because
Yep.
fat has that wonderful, satiety factor. It fills you up. So when you eat fat, you eat less carbs. Well, and we're talking about insulin resistance too. Just another thing that comes to mind that's great about fat is it promotes nutrient absorption. So, especially people with
Yes.
insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, they can benefit from specific nutrients for blood sugar support. That's why I mentioned that supplementation is really critical for people who are actually trying to get off their medications. Fat helps to increase absorption of nutrients. So, it's kind of like you're getting a bigger bang for your buck, so to speak, when you eat healthy fat.
Yeah, pour that olive oil on that big
Yeah.
salad because you're going to absorb all the A, D, E, and K
Yeah.
vitamins as opposed to like the fat-free dressing.
Yeah,
Seems like such a
exactly.
waste.
Just remember that not all fats are created equal. So we're talking about
Yes.
avocado,
Yes.
butter, coconut oil, olive oil, nuts, seeds, cheese if you can tolerate it, coconut milk, olives. Like there's so many great options. Heavy cream if you can tolerate it, coconut cream, fat from organic grass-fed meat. We're not talking about. I think you'd probably agree with me, Leanne, is like canola oil, corn
Yeah.
oil, soybean
Hmm.
oil, sesame seed oil, cottonseed oil, vegetable oil, shortening, margarine. Those fats actually, it's
Crisco
actually kind of
stuff.
crazy. Those can
Yeah.
do the complete opposite. Those can promote inflammation, and it's like there's such a big difference between the good fats and the bad fats. You want to make sure you're paying attention and consuming the healthy ones.
Yeah, totally. And we chat about all that on healthfulpursuit.com. You will not find any yucky fats anywhere on my
Love it.
website because I just, no. I mean, even the difference that you feel, like if I have something made with coconut, say I'm out about with friends and they order a thing of fries and I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm going to have some. The difference between fries in vegetable oil and fries like made at home with coconut oil,
Oh, yeah.
like it's night and day. It's night and day just in the way that you feel. I mean, yeah, it's still potatoes and it's still starch. But I really believe in like that healthy balance. Like if my friends are having fries, I'm going to have a couple.
Yeah.
But, the difference just in the way that it's cooked and the way that it tastes, like it's just, yeah, healthy fats. That's what we're talking about for sure. Thank you for adding that disclaimer.
Yeah, absolutely. Important to distinguish, but healthy
Yeah.
fats are wonderful. You can go to town with those.
Yeah. For people that want to follow you online, I mean, you mentioned your newsletter. I'll link some stuff
Thank you.
below our video so that you can go there. And that recent blog post you just talked about 10 signs that aren't
Oh,
nutrition
cool.
based, why
Yeah.
you're not losing weight. We'll include that in the show notes too, just below this
Thank
video
you.
or, linking over here. I do a bunch of things all over. So look everywhere for this information. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show. I think we totally nailed the blood sugar and high fat issue. A lot of people always say, like, what actually happens to our blood sugar when we go high fat? And I think we've said, it does wonderful things. You can get in
Yeah.
control of your blood sugar finally.
Well, I hope everyone got a sound bite or two. It was really fun to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.